So that means we can move on to our next speaker, and it is Helen Stevens, who is the Church Relations Manager at Rocha, and she leads on Eco Church. And she's had a role for 3.5 years now and still feels passionately about the difference that churches and other faith communities can make to the big environmental challenges that we face. So, Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm just going to share my slides, hopefully. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. It's really lovely to be with you all today, and as Ruth and Bishop James commented, to see you, some of you from different parts of the country. I'm in Hampton in southwest London, where it's pretty rainy today, but really good to see the rain after such a dry period. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us this morning. Ruth has provided such a helpful context to the issues that we're facing globally. And so I'm going to dive straight in because there's quite a lot that I'd like to cover this morning. I'm going to talk perhaps in more detail than I ordinarily would about Eco Church and the questionnaire, because we have titled this conference Going Beyond Bronze, recognising that churches may get stuck in making that transition from bronze to silver, from a bronze to silver award, where more concerted action might be needed. But I'm also not going to assume today that you're from a church that already has a bronze award. And so I'm going to aim to cover as much as I can about getting to an award as getting beyond it. I'm going to try to set out a foundational approach for getting started and getting to bronze, which I hope will stand you in good stead for going beyond this. But let me begin briefly with what Eco Church is about and why we started it in the first place. I think, as I said, Ruth has provided a really helpful theological and global perspective. I'm just going to try and pick up on how Eco Church provides a framework for that, really. And it's by no means an exhaustive approach. There is always more that we can do, but it is a framework for action to try to help us to put some shape on some of the massive issues that Ruth has mentioned. So it was launched in 2016. It's been going for just over 5 years now. We celebrated that with a lovely online service with Bishop Nicholas Holton last month, which you can find online should you be interested. And it's very much for churches of all denominations. And we have a complete range of churches, from C of E to United Reform, Methodist, Quaker, Salvation Army, independent churches. We're looking at how we can make it more applicable for fresh expressions. So it's just wonderful to see so many different styles of church engaging in this way. It's an award scheme, as I mentioned, so churches register their intent to take action and then can work towards a bronze, silver and gold award, not because the awards are important in their own right, but actually it's a great way of monitoring and celebrating progress and taking the time to stop and reflect and then sort of regroup and go forward again. There's a practical toolkit of resources online that we're just in the process of updating, but it's increasingly too a growing community of learning coming together for events like this to enable us to learn and share from each other. And I'm always just amazed by how much the stories of what churches are doing are so inspiring, and we're going to hear from a couple of churches later today, which I'm really looking forward to. Ruth mentioned Sir David Attenborough. One of my sisters brought me a copy of his book. I don't know how well you can see that, but anyway, for Christmas, it's called A Life on Our Planet, My Witness Statement and a Vision for the Future. I confess I've not read it yet. My reading pile gets ever higher. But David Attenborough offered his witness statement in a Netflix special last year. about the perils that we're collectively facing on our planet, as well as his vision of hope for the future. And you know, Ruth again set that out for us this morning with our theological and our faith perspective on this. But it's surely a vital combination, bearing witness to what we see and know to be true, what we saw in that Tear Fund video at the end there, these powerful images, as climate change, habitat and species loss happens all around us, whilst also offering a vision and hope of a different world. And I think we have to do both. Whilst there might not be any of us online today who've had the length of time on Earth or the breadth of experience of David Attenborough, we can all bear witness to the time that we're in, a time that scientists are calling the Anthropocene, because human beings have come to dominate and shape the planet to such an extent. Ruth already mentioned this verse, but I just love this image of Earth from space. I think the first landing on the moon was celebrated, was it last year or the year before? And I just can't imagine the awe that the astronauts must have felt at seeing this view for the first time. And it now may seem such a familiar view to us, but our Earth is so rich, and Genesis 1 is full of such rich descriptions of our wonderful Earth, and of a level of detailed design that surely could only be given by a God who cares for and loves all that he is creating. And so I think eco-church, or frankly whatever we're doing to care for the Earth through whatever means in our church lives and as individual Christians, can serve as part of our witness statement, as a visible and practical demonstration that we worship a creator God who loves his creation, all of it, not just us, and that one day we'll see it restored, and that he calls us to be part of this. So we hold a vision at Rocha UK of churches across the country understanding the biblical mandate to care for creation as a core part of our Christian mission, and to outwork this in practical ways across our communities, working with others who are already wanting to do likewise, to restore nature and our relationship with it. And this is really the ethos of eco-church, a community that now consists of more than 3,500 churches, many of which already have or are working towards an award. I think there are 1,100 awards now and 17 gold churches. And in 2016, in fact, when Ruth was at Rocha, we set a target to reach 10% of churches within 10 years across England and Wales. And that 10% was thought to be a tipping point. There's evidence for that, beyond which, a point beyond which caring for creation, churches practically engaged in this, would seem increasingly normal, as normal to us as some of the other fundamental tenets of our faith, and would gain its own momentum. So we're getting close to that target, but I think, as Ruth alluded to as well, we know we've got to go further. And so we now would like to get to 15% of churches in the next 5 years, but also to see a greater depth of action. So seeing many more churches going beyond registration to get to bronze, silver and gold awards, to see many more churches deepening engagement with their whole community, not just to get to that all-important net zero target that the Church of England and now the Church in Wales and other denominations are also looking at, but to help bring about a fair transition to a low carbon, high nature economy and society. I'm just going to explain in 2 minutes or so then how to get started. And as I think, as Ruth said, you know, a lot of this is about doing what we're doing already, but with a wider lens, and trying to draw people in. You know, there are 90 odd of us on the call today, but how many thousands of people are there across our churches who we need to try to engage with this? I think a great first step is to identify a team of people who can work on this together, ideally across different areas of church life. So not necessarily people who are the strong environmental advocates and activists, but people who already feel passionate about leading worship, or about hospitality, and get them to see this with a green lens, with a faith lens, to incorporate caring for the earth in ways in which they're already serving us in our churches, ways in which we're serving each other. And I think that's because whilst it's vital to have a church leadership support and encouragement and engagement, it's ultimately about embedding caring for creation into the culture of our church. So find out what other people are interested in. I think you'd be amazed how many times in starting Eco Church, people discover others who have similar passions. And also just thinking about the last 5 years, there is so much more awareness in our wider society of what's going on, the climate crises, which, you know, had we not had this pandemic, almost certainly would have been top of the story for last year. So it gives us that opportunity to engage people in conversation. I think coming out of lockdown may provide some great opportunities for conversations about what's helped people through lockdown. I can't help thinking, and in fact it's been reported, that many will have appreciated the outdoors in a whole new way. There are RHS stats that many more people have taken up gardening for the first time, tried growing their own vegetables during this time. So there are points of traction already. You can go onto the Eco Church website, and there you'll find a link to register and log on to the Eco Church app. And you need to set your own login details up, and then you locate your church on a Google map. And either you'll find that it's already been registered, or you can click to register it and create a profile. And then you can start the online survey, which you can come back to and revisit. There's no time limit on it. And you can invite other people to join that church team on the app and to work on it together. One great way to decide where to start with the survey might be to find a way to share it with the congregation, and maybe decide together what you're going to tackle across each of the 5 categories that I'm going to come on to shortly. I was not sure where to go with the polls this morning, but I think we will try 2 of them, and I might not be able to answer or speak to everything that comes up from this. But as we're doing more of these in-depth sessions in June, through a series of webinars that the Church of England is organising, then I hope you don't mind me asking you these questions, and we can always use this as background for ways in which we do these sessions in the future. So Claire, I assume I need to stop sharing my screen. Yes. And then we're going to have one poll just to ask about some of the barriers that you might be facing, and another one around the categories of Eco Church itself, which are worship and teaching, buildings, land, global and community engagement, and lifestyle. And I'm going to talk about all of those a bit more in depth this morning, but I'd love to just get a quick sense of what you might be struggling with. So the biggest challenge to you progressing to an award. If you could please just pick one of those, whether it's support from the congregation, feeling that you're doing it on your own, support from the leadership, having been in lockdown and the fact that we've not been in our churches and we've been meeting in a different way, not knowing what to prioritise, or if you like, where to start, or something else. I could have had an endless list here, but I just tried to come up with some quick categories. How's that going, Claire?
Yep, I'm just about to close the poll and share the results.
Thank you.
People are, I think, just voting. Okay.
Okay, really interesting. So about a third of you have said support from the congregation. So this is all about how on earth do we embed this so it becomes sort of a normal part of what we're doing. And again, nearly a third of you not knowing what to prioritise. I'm hoping I'm going to try and help a bit with that this morning, at least as far as sort of doing some of the simple things. And lockdown is not a surprise. Yeah, nearly 20% of you, that we've been doing things differently, but it might be that there are habits and new ways of doing church that we can take forward, that just the very fact of being able to meet together this morning from across the country. We've been doing an online prayer meeting in my church, which has gone really well. Thank you, Claire. Shall we go with the second one, please? So the category of eco-church that you're finding the most challenging. I'm really hoping it doesn't come up with buildings, as I am not a buildings expert, but we'll see what happens.
We'll just give this a few more seconds while people try and make their choice.
Thanks, Claire.
Okay. Sorry, Helen.
No, thank you. Ah, there we go. Okay. All right. No, that's interesting. Not a total surprise. Interesting that community and global engagement is at 30%. So that's great that I can leave that to Joe this morning. Lifestyle, that's the third one. That's interesting. Ruth's written L is for lifestyle. Let me plug that. But we're seeing this come up actually, that churches are struggling in this area too. Okay, worship and teaching just 1%, which I am not so surprised by. Okay, and that will help me try and think where to go in the time we've got left. Okay, thanks, Claire, and thank you all. That's really helpful. Let me just go back to my slides. So maybe I don't need to say very much about worship and teaching, but actually I do want to start here, because we do say that this is foundational to the whole, because it's about transforming our hearts and minds. And what's at the root of our disconnection with nature and land is an issue of spirituality. And I think, before we start thinking about our buildings and measuring our carbon, Pope Francis talks about us needing an ecological conversion of our hearts and minds. And so this category does underpin the whole. I'm really encouraged that, you're not struggling with this. And actually, I would say we've seen a raising of the bar in the time that EcoChurch has been running. And many, many, many more churches are coming straight in with gold in this category. So I'm interested in what Ruth is saying about us still needing to go deeper in developing that biblical understanding. And I don't disagree with that at all. I think I have been challenged that the worship and teaching section is now almost too easy. But I think that we have to take encouragement that, there is looking at creation, looking at our God as creator, is being more and more incorporated into our time of corporate worship together. We always encourage people to enjoy it. I think if you're looking to struggle to get people engaged in the practical work of EcoChurch, then maybe coming back to this and finding joy together in creation, putting in time to go out and take walks together as a church community, to just enjoy being in nature, might help to stimulate some response and desire for people to take action. I do just want to mention in this section, and it's not specifically in the survey, but increasingly we're hearing of a need to respond to grief for all that we have lost and are losing. And so I think along with finding joy in creation, it is also a place for lamentation and repentance for our own contribution to environmental destruction that we're witnessing. And just to flag to you a webinar coming up this Tuesday, so I'm sorry there's not much time to book, but with Reverend Lucy Winkett and Hannah Malcolm and somebody from Engage Worship, we're going to be looking at this very issue. But just to say that there are lots of resources now, I think, around small group teaching, Bible teaching and so on. There's Tenets of the King from Operation Noah. Ruth wrote Saying Yes to Life, the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book last year. So yeah, I think, you know, as I say, I'm encouraged that this is not a section that people are struggling with. Just to flag very briefly to you as well, if you've not heard it already, Climate Sunday, which I think Joe Chamberlain will mention, is a year-long campaign to get churches to commit to take action, whether that's to join Eco Church or to go further on an award. And that's a great way, if you've not yet started or, down the award route, of holding a climate service, committing to take action and joining the call to sign the Climate Coalition's Time Is Now declaration. Because of time, I'm not going to go through worship and teaching questions in detail, but just to encourage you that if you're not yet at bronze, or actually even if you're at silver trying to go beyond it, I think this is a section that's very achievable. And like I said, we're seeing lots of churches come in at bronze already. Buildings, though, is the one you've highlighted. And yes, our buildings are difficult to heat and light, expensive to run. They are assets that we need to look after and steward. There are also perhaps creative ways in which we can look to use our spaces. There are questions in here about how to invest in the fabric and maintenance of buildings, including, for example, sustainable refurbishment, if you're going to go down that route. This is an image from Christchurch in Toxteth Park in Liverpool. They went for a creative solution to meeting in their church and meeting a marquee, which allows them to have light and warmth in a smaller space instead of trying to heat the whole of this beautiful building. There are lots of green and ethical investment implications at various points in the survey, whether or not whether electricity and gas is supplied by renewables or indeed on-site generated. There are things in here about setting targets for carbon reduction. And now there's a really helpful tool from Climate Stewards called 360 Carbon, which will help you as a church to collect all the data that you need to enable you to measure your footprint and set targets. And that links with, for those of you in the Anglican Church, the environmental footprint tool, which I think is now part of the parish returns process. Collectively though, sorry, I was expecting a different slide next. I was just going to say, no, let me talk about St James's. Just to say, St James's is a Grade 1 listed building at the heart of Piccadilly in London. And they did manage to get to gold in 2018. That admittedly was after many, many years of already working on an environmental agenda, but they've got solar panels on their Grade 1 listed roof. They're not a wealthy church by any means. It's taken them time to do all that they've done. But I just want to encourage you, if you're in a Grade 1 listed building, that you can, there's lots that you can still do. I'll talk to you a bit more about their garden shortly. Let me, sorry, and just to say, as I think I did, one of the simplest things we can all do is switch to renewable electricity. And then that's regardless of anything about faculty permissions in C of E churches or investing in the fabric. You can switch to renewable electricity and gas today, with the exception that you might be in a contract, but it's probably the easiest thing to do. I'm just going to go through some of the questions more specifically in this section, and I'll maybe be faster on the other sections. But just let me run through these questions that would get you to a bronze at relatively little or no cost. Electricity supply I've just mentioned, so switch to renewables. Gas supply, the same there, even if you have just some gas that's from renewables. The lighting in our church premises uses energy efficient light bulbs, and I've put all low energy for that. I haven't even gone to LEDs because I think by now that low energy bulbs have been around for sufficient time that it's likely that you're going to have some of those in the mix. got a policy designed to limit the amount of energy consumed by flood lighting or security lighting around our church premises. I put yes to that. The toilet systems on our church premises are fitted with dual flush or other water saving devices. Could just use a hippo bag or something like that. So I put yes to that. I've said we sometimes use recycled toilet paper. You might be just giving that a go. Don't use disposables. So again, before lockdown, far more of us got used to carrying our mugs around with us. So maybe encourage members of your congregation to bring their own mug or invest as a one-off in some china mugs, or get people to donate a spare mug that they've got from home and just create a lovely collection. Reducing paper usage. I've said we're always aiming to do that. Our church uses recycled paper. I've said yes to that, and that we've got recycling facilities available on our premises. If you pretty much did those things, that would get you to a bronze award at relatively little or no cost. Now, admittedly, to get to silver, you do need to start looking at things like double glazing, insulation, measuring your carbon footprint, biting the bullet and doing something on that. I can't go, don't necessarily have the knowledge to go into all of this. We do have a network of specialist advisors on buildings that we've put together actually over the last 12 months or so. So if there's a specific question that you're struggling with, we can share the mailbox and you can send your questions in to them. But also just to say that this is about doing what we can do. And if you get to a point where there are things that you can't do, then it is, there's an option to say it's just not applicable and to move on. I'm very conscious of time and I do want to talk about land because as well as a climate crisis, we're facing a biodiversity crisis, which as much as anything is a crisis about land. How we use it, farm on it, build on it, all of which presents us with choices about how to care for and protect creation. And as Bishop James talked about this morning, having a Sabbath for the land. Our land is just worn out, so much of it. But if we have land in our churches, even a small area, and these are all photos from St James's Piccadilly from the garden there, and they've got a very small garden, but they've planted for pollinators. They've created a bog garden out of buckets. They are trying to use their space in creative ways. You may be in a church that doesn't have land, but you really don't need very much of it to make a difference. Even just planting up some plants that pollinators love in your car park. I do also want to flag to you something coming up in June this year, which is a pilot that we're running with the Church of England, the Church in Wales, Caring for God's Acre, about encouraging us in our churches to get out and see what's on our land. So it's Churches Count on Nature, and it's a bit of citizen science, if you like, to notice and record species, which then via Caring for God's Acre will go into a national database. And again, we've got a network of naturalists who would just love to help you engage in something like this. Coming back to the specific questions on land, things like our church actively encourages members to use church land for recreation and contemplation. So having times of prayer outside, outdoor picnics, encouraging other members of the local community to come in, and Churches Count on Nature might be a way in which you can do that. These are some of the questions. If you answer yes to these, along with encouraging native wildlife, something as simple as the provision of bird boxes, look into changing your mowing regime so that you leave areas for wildflowers, avoiding harsh chemicals, and so on, then you can get to a bronze level. This is Mickledon Methodist Church near Stratford upon Avon, and a few years back they created a garden called the 3 Bs. It's a very elderly congregation. They've reached out to people in their local community, and they've got businesses to donate recycled benches made from plastic. They've planted up wildflowers. They've put some identification boards on the back of the church. That's been a project that's given them a lot of focus and has helped connect them to their community. If you add in a pond or a wetland area, even like the buckets that I showed you at St James's, maybe undertake some of your own composting and do a couple more things, you can reach silver. I'm just trying to jump ahead a bit because I am very conscious of time. I am probably not going to say so much on this, except to re-emphasise, as Ruth did, that the challenges that we're facing, climate change, environmental degradation, are affecting the poorest the most. This happens to be a Tear Fund slide taken a few years back. Everything in this section around community and global engagement is about recognising that we're in a global and an interconnected world, and it's encouraging us to work both locally with other organisations like transition towns, environmental organisations that are on our doorsteps, but also to be looking nationally and globally to take political action. And the Climate Sunday campaign is a way in which you can do that. But let me just very quickly touch on some of the questions. So, for example, doing a litter pick, at least annually do a litter pick. I know of a church during lockdown that purchased a load of litter pickers and made them available for people to just borrow from the porch at church on their daily walks. I don't know about you in your area, but I've noticed so much more litter since lockdown has lifted, and I feel like that's the tip of the iceberg. Our church organises events for people to get out and enjoy nature together, to enjoy God's earth, even just occasionally. I've answered to that. Can you use your church premises to encourage people to minimise resource use by having signage up about switching off lights and so on? Yes to that. Can you promote eco-church or taking environmental action to other churches? So I put yes to that. Can you pray regularly for a specific overseas environmental project? Could be one of our Rocha other national organisations. It could be projects from Christian Aid, Tear Fund, Climate Stewards, and so on. So I've said yes to that. Our church participates in national campaigns at least annually. I've said yes to that. Do it through Climate Sunday. Our church keeps the congregation informed about climate change and so on. I've said yes to that. Any meals provided always include a vegetarian or vegan option. This is so much more common now. I've said yes to that. And we take steps to reduce food waste if we serve meals in church. That will get you to a bronze level. If you add in things like toilet twinning, that is a Tear Fund scheme, working with a local conservation organisation and so on, you'll find yourself en route to silver. Rugby went all out for toilet twinning. St Andrew's, a gold church there, didn't just twin their own toilets, but they've gone and done so for their MP, for schools. That's been sort of a focus that they've had. That's been their project. And maybe you can see a theme developing here, that there are churches that have made one project something that they've really gone out for, and that might be like almost their flagship thing, but it's had impact on everything that they've done and raised awareness. Lifestyle is the fifth and final section. We're nearly there. It came up again as a challenging area. This is all about what we're doing in our homes, and it's about encouraging each other. So maybe can you appoint somebody who's going to champion this cause in your church, for encouraging each other to become more environmentally conscious in our lifestyles. Walking and cycling to church is something that we can promote. Encouraging the principles of reducing, reusing and recycling. Maybe your church could consider being a sort of refill larder, buying products in bulk and then enabling people to come in with refillable bottles to take to go home with their laundry liquid or whatever it is. There are lots of creative things here. I'm going to flag Creation Care, which is a new series of awards that a church in Dorking launched last year, which goes into this in a lot more detail. You don't need that level of detail to get your bronze or silver awards here. But yes, this also, thinking back to one of the earlier questions, This also looks at ethical investment of personal savings, which we should be doing as a church, but also in our own lives. Both our current account, but our pensions, as has been mentioned. These are some of the issues that come up here. I'm going to stop because I'm way over time. I just want to flag to you finally, Wild Christian, another Rocha programme, which is increasingly an online community of people who all want to explore together how to connect, exactly as it says, issues of faith, nature and climate. So there's a monthly email, often with a biblical reflection, and then some practical stories and details about what we can do in our homes and our day-to-day lives that will encourage us to make these changes together. And just to encourage you again that, you know, any of these things that I've gone through that might seem like a drop in the ocean, if just one or two of them were doing it, that may be the case. But together, doing these actions, we have so much collective power that we can start to make a difference and influence others to do the same. I am sorry that I have gone over time. I am going to stop there.
No problem, Helen. That was absolutely fantastic. Just a huge range of ideas and ways in which we can go forward, not just starting on our journey, but continuing on it. We haven't got much time, but just if we ask two quick questions, and on that theme of we start on the journey and then we've got to bronze, and can we go any further? A comment from a couple of people was that people lose heart after they've perhaps got their bronze award, as they can't get to silver, and there are issues perhaps with lack of money and things like that. Have you any thoughts there you can offer? Any additional thoughts?
Gosh, yeah. If it's reassuring, that's the point that my church is at. And there are quite a few of us. We've got tier fund people in my church congregation. And yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot on a church's agenda. I think one of the challenges that we have, and maybe it's a challenge for our leadership too, is to bring these issues together. As Ruth said, when she goes and speaks to some students, she gets them to list the issues. And maybe it is about trying to broaden our vision to realise that actually pretty much any aspect of what we're looking at in our church, you know, whether it's social justice, Black Lives Matter, there is so much linkage here. That this, you know, this is about the whole of our mission really, not a fragmented approach. I do think we get tired, and I do think actually we've got to go back to nature and get outside and find ourselves refreshed. I know it for myself, I'm sort of at that point, and I went for a walk on Friday morning around Bushy Park near where I live, and felt revived just by seeing the deer and being out on a beautiful sunny day. I think we have to take time to rest as well and to regroup.
Yes, very, very, very important. Thank you. And one last question. Do we need to keep an audit trail of what we achieve in moving from one level to another for evidence of our actions?
Well, that's a good question. Just to give you a brief insight then maybe into the awards, we don't go into sort of bronze in detail. We trust a church on what they've said. At silver, we like to see we're a bit more interested, take a bit more time to look at what you're doing and what you're sharing with others. I think for your own reference, it's useful. I know of churches that maybe have created a spreadsheet, and we're looking at this, how we can kind of turn it into almost a useful tool that people can use in a more programmatic way. I think it's good to know where you've come from, and also to just revisit some of the actions perhaps that you got to for bronze to make sure you're still doing them. But we're not going to ask you for evidence at silver. We will do it more so at gold, probably.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Helen.